Merry Christmas, St. Mary's. It is day 4 or 5 of Christmas. So, if you gave up celebrating, you've fallen into temptation. You're in error. You're supposed to keep celebrating for the full 8 days. So, like, even if you don't want to keep going, you have to keep going. Having a just like a mind or a more of a festive understanding of the 8 days, I think is good. It's healthy. So today we're going to ask the question: what does the Catechism teach about uh, the use of tobacco or drinking alcohol? And it's pretty clear. I was actually surprised to find this. So it says the virtue of temperance disposes us to avoid every kind of excess. The abuse of food, alcohol, tobacco, or medicine. Those incur grave guilt who by drunkenness or love of speed endanger their own and others' safety on the road, at sea, or in the air. The use of drugs inflicts very grave damage on human health and life. Their use, except on um, um, strictly therapeutic grounds, is a grave offense. Clandestine production and trafficking in drugs are scandalous practices. They constitute direct cooperation in evil, since they encourage people to practice gravely contrary to the moral law. Okay, so just going to break this down from my understanding of the subject. And so, what the church seems to have taught for a very long time is that there obviously are pleasures that God gives us, right? It's actually part of our overall health, right? Like we actually need pleasure in order to survive. Almost, it's almost like if we're just completely deprived, it's unhealthy, right? It's not good for the soul. So the church recognizes this, so they have a whole calendar which revolves around feasting and fasting, right? So Advent's a time of fasting, and then Christmas is a time of feasting, right? For 8 days, that's why we feast. And if I look tired, it's because I've just been feasting. So, but you don't want to like you don't just like, all caution to the wind, and you just, drink, smoke, and eat food until you pass out. So like there's obviously a level in which it's healthy for us in both directions, right? We can have too much of an access of pleasure, and then it damages our soul, or we can have a deficiency in pleasure and it actually damages our soul. Right? It sucks the joy from our bones. So we want to have a appropriate use, and so the way that the church kind of maybe views this, my understanding is that we have a kind of a spectrum of things that we can use. So alcohol is actually healthy for you if you use it in appropriate, in a moderate amount. So I think for men it changes on the weight, but typically for a man it is, I think, 2 units of alcohol, whatever that is, like a glass of wine or a beer or whatever. And then for women, it's one, just based on scientific data or whatever. They kind of study the health benefits actually exist in that quantity for the different sexes. And obviously, it fluctuates, right? So smaller men have a smaller amount of intake, which is good for them. Larger women have a greater intake, which would be good for them. So it's not like exact science here, but so the idea is that it can be healthy for you. And so another term that they kind of bring up here, or it says the abuse of food, alcohol, or tobacco or medicine. So they do mention tobacco, and so it seems that the reason tobacco is mentioned in the Catechism is because there is a way to moderate it, in which it's not going to damage your body. And so obviously we're pretty used to people who don't moderate it, right? So if you're smoking cigarettes, I think the amount that lung cancer was almost unheard of before the commercialization of cigarettes and just the use of cigarettes. It was almost non-existent. And then when cigarettes and tobacco really kind of hit the mainstream is when it skyrocketed, profoundly. I can't remember, it was like 400% or whatever. but it might have been much more. So I think that we're pretty used to people not using it in moderation, but uh, but but the reason that the church mentions it is because it's not sinful to use it if you are able to hit the moderation, and it depends on each person, right? So if I was a chain smoker for 30 years, I wouldn't. It would be probably more morally questionable to have a cigarette in that state, or have a cigar or whatever. If something were to trigger that, then that would be much more dangerous, I would say. Not because, and same thing goes with alcohol. Like if I'm an alcoholic, it's different for one person who can have alcohol and not be affected by it, as opposed to somebody who can have um, a drink, and that just kind of sets them on a trajectory for the rest of their life. So it is, in a sense, it's subjective. We have to be aware that we're all psychologically different. And so what we can handle and what's good for us is not universal, right? So we have to use prudence when we kind of exercise the pleasures which are licit. So the pleasures which God allows us to celebrate or to utilize, and it's not just like a one size fits all kind of thing. So I think that now there are certain drugs that are forbidden by the church, and the reason is because I'm trying to think of an example. So heroin, for instance, there's no use of moderation. There's no window of moderation. So you basically go from 0 to 100. For marijuana, for instance, is also another substance in which there's not a lesser intake. There's not an intake which you can take to moderate the experience. The way that the drug actually works in your brain is it opens all the receptors at once. The dopamine receptors for alcohol, or tobacco for that fact, they slowly open up our dopamine receptors, so we can take it in a way which is moderate. But if you smoke, you're going to get high. If you smoke marijuana, you're going to get high. But if you drink alcohol, you're not necessarily drunk immediately. And so there is a distinction there. And the intensity of it also is a factor, right? So with mind-altering substances, like caffeine, for instance, doesn't take away my reason. So I still have the faculty of reason. I can still make decisions. I can still make choices. When I start to surrender that, that's a grave sin. Is when we start to give up our reason for pleasure, and then we're giving up the greatest gift which God has given to us for something much lesser, for our own a physical enjoyment, which equates us to the beasts, is what the Old Testament quite frequently says. So I think it's a fascinating subject, and again, so these are some of the things that the church kind of allows, like sweets, for instance. Like it's not like cake isn't like good for you. It's not like there's too much of a nutritional value. But there is more to us than just our bodies, right? Like we are made to celebrate at a certain time and at a certain place, right? So is cake damaging our bodies? Potentially, right, to a certain degree, but not to like a lethal degree. We do have like a spectrum in which we can sustain certain things, right? Like our immune systems can handle quite a bit. But if we're doing it every day, that changes the story. And so we just want to use it in the way that the church kind of guides us to use it. So for drinks and sweets and everything like that, again, like it's 8 days of feasting, and then we're kind of back to normal everyday life or ordinary time, and then Lent starts, and then it gets intense, and then you start with Easter, and then it goes back to the 8 day celebration. So it's really awesome, and you actually enjoy life much more fully when you follow the teachings of the Catholic Church. Eventually, if you just indulge in all kinds of pleasures, everything becomes sour or just empty. So follow the church, when it comes to doing things that are pleasurable. If you really truly seek perfection, St. Teresa of Avila says that the perfect don't even do what's allowable, right? They'll just kind of sustain their joy on God alone, which is absolutely possible. My recreation is prayer. I just like enjoy going and sitting in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and I've gotten to a point where I don't really need a book. I don't really need to do anything. I literally just sit there and just like receive God, and I just like have this experience of just like just like perfect joy. I mean, it's awesome. So, but again, that takes time to get there. Those are just my thoughts. Anyways, that's it for me. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year's, and thank you again for watching. Tom Lee, I'll see you next week. God bless. Bye.